The Plotcast Podcast with the Potty Plotters.
Well, here we are. We're back again, and we are still the Potty Plotters doing our Plotcast podcast. This is episode 45. I know, Julia. I know. It's a shock, isn't it? We're still here. And I'm Elaine.
And I'm still Julia.
Which is good. And, Julia, I'd like to announce that people have been finding us and making contact. Now, I say that because usually we get this bit wrong and then the producer steps in, shakes his head and all that malarkey. Yeah. But how do they get in touch with us? And let's get it right.
So, Facebook, Instagram and X, Twitter, at Potty Plotters, TikTok at...
TikTok, how interesting. No, let's have a TikTok, shall we?
TikTok at The Potty Plotters. Email us naughtycorner at pottyplotters.uk or check out our website pottyplotters.uk. If we get to the end of the year and we've got to crack this, I think that's enough for me, Elaine.
Yeah, it is. Don't matter whether we can grow, it's the fact that we can never get that bit right.
Yeah, and people who are listening, if we sound a bit echoey, we've had to come into the community room again on the allotment. That's because it's chucking it down and it is cold, and I'm thankful that I have put my thermals on today, but we're not allowed the equipment in the rain, are we, Elaine?
No, in fact, we haven't got a lot of equipment, so it's best that we stay where we are. But yes, it's quite nice having a little echo. Gives that atmos. That's what the young people say nowadays. That means atmosphere.
You're
a bit older. I know.
Yeah,
I've heard it.
The Plotcast Podcast with the Potty Plotters.
Right then, so let's get on with it. Planting. Let's get some planting done, Julia, because people keep saying, what can I do for Christmas? Well, I suggest you go and shop. Go and get something and give them away. It's presents. It's all that, that's what people do. But we can be planting at this time of year, and that's because I always think of you at Christmas going to a very big, posh, stately home.
Oh, yes.
I think it is a stately home, isn't it?
Yes,
yeah,
it
big
is,
posh house anyway.
Yeah.
North of the county, gold all the way round the windows.
Yeah, give another clue, go on.
I haven't got another clue. Right. They've got deer out in the garden, the acres.
Yeah. And they have a beautiful Christmas display, don't
they? They do.
Anyway.
They do. And you often take your mum there and you saw something that you were horrified at.
Well, yes, I was horrified because I went in their farm shop, Elaine. This was a couple of years ago, so goodness knows what it is now. But I went in their farm shop and I looked and I found a very tiny box of pea shoots. And I was horrified. They were £3.50.
That's quite a lot of money, isn't it?
It is.
Particularly in this day and age when you can grow your own. So we're going to tell you how to do it. It is dead simple. The hardest part, we struggled with this, didn't we?
Yeah.
Eating a whole box of chocolates in 24 hours.
Yeah.
But we managed it, didn't we?
I mean, we'll give it a go.
Right then, at this time of year, you'll see boxes of chocolates on offer in all the big supermarkets, and they're the plastic boxes, and you might ooh and ah and say, oh no, don't do any plastic. Actually, yes, let the kids and all your relatives eat the chocolates if you must, or hide them. That's another clue that we do. And then get the box. Now then, you've got the box and you've got the lid. What I would say is keep both, because you need both, and all that you need to do is whack some holes in the bottom of the container, then pile in your multi-purpose compost, or it doesn't matter, you can use soil. Okay. And then pat it down so that it's quite firm. Now what you need to do is wet it good and proper. You're looking horrified, Julia, but you do need to wet it. Okay. And you wet it now because it'll be harder to do in a little while otherwise. And I need to keep these seeds from rolling all over the place.
Okay.
So now what you need is a box of bigger peas. B-I-G-G-A. Bigger. You make your mushy peas from that, don't you?
Yeah. So when you say mushy peas, bigger peas, you have to get the dried peas and not the mushy ones that are actually in the tins.
Tins. No, we're not growing tins, Julia. We are on episode 45, and you're just working out that we're growing stuff rather than opening tins of vegetables. It's a sad day, and
The only reason I mention it, Elaine, is I don't want people going out and buying a tin of mushy peas and then just spilling them all over the top of the compost. That's not going to work, is it?
No, it's not. What you really do need are the dried peas, but we're not going to make them into mushy peas.
Okay.
What we're going to do is we're going to set them. So now just get a handful of those dried peas out of the box and pop them onto the top. Now, I'm doing it like it's in front of me, but push each one into the wet soil that you've got in front of you and make sure that they're covered. So pile it all over now so that they're well and truly snug inside. And then what I actually do is put the top under the bottom. Have you got
Yes,
that?
I've got that. To act as like a dish to collect the
Right.
water.
Yeah, and that will save your windowsill, because now what you're going to do is you're going to put that on your windowsill. Julia, you don't have to go to any posh place for Christmas. You can have your own mushy peas that are not, because these are going to be pea shoots. And all you do is you cut them as you need them. They'll only take a couple of weeks to get going. Try it.
And I'll have probably, 2 or 3 cuttings off them?
At least.
Oh,
yeah.
fantastic.
Yeah.
And I'll have spent the same £3.50 on my tub of chocolates, but eaten all the chocolates, so that's a bonus.
It is a bonus, actually. Should have thought of that.
Hints and tips for shortcuts to success. The Potty Plotters Plotcast.
Right then, Julia, enough of all that nonsense about Christmas. Christmas will come, Christmas will go. It'll still be the 25th of December, whether you like it or not. Let's have a chat to Andy Perry. Now, Andy Perry, we had a lovely chat with, didn't we?
Yeah, we did.
And he is from Urban Herbs in Birmingham.
Right,
So he's only just up the road. And he does the work with Kate Perry.
Yes.
Not to be confused with any other celebrity.
Not Katy Perry.
No, not at all, no.
Okay.
And they know what they're talking about. Now, all I can say is that we came up with 5 herbs that we've planted over the last 12 months. So let's see if Andy can beat that number.
I could talk about herbs all day, and I could suggest herbs for England. So if you wanted me to limit my suggestions to just 5 today, I could give you a different 5 tomorrow.
Oh,
Wow.
But that's the magical thing about herbs, you see, that they are so different for so many different people. And for example, if you were interviewing my wife, she would recommend a different favourite 5. Midsummer, I would suggest 5 varieties that I love in the month of July. And going into the winter months, there's so many different herbs that I literally just can't get enough of when the mercury starts to fall.
It's really interesting because I can't think of more than 5, to be honest with you, Elaine. And, when we think of herbs, I think of cooking, but I suppose you're thinking about herbs in a different way, because are you using them for flavouring drinks? Or, how can we use herbs in a different way? Because we are, I wouldn't say old, but we are. And the only thing that I can think of about herbs at the moment is yesterday we were doing an edible wreath, and we were just on site looking for the biggest rosemary bush we could find to prune it, because we like to prune the bush and use it in the edible wreath. So what would we use thousands of herbs for?
Well, I guess the question we need to ask right at the start of this chat is, how far down the herb geek rabbit hole do we want to go today?
We want to go right to the end in the burrow bit. Yes, come on, let's get in there.
Because when I've listened to your podcast, because you do a podcast as well, don't you, Andy, with your lovely wife? Kate?
We do, yeah. And I mean, for those of you listening to this, we launched the Growing Up podcast, and I'm not joking. We only did so because we wanted to create time to talk to each other.
Yeah.
Because
don't start saying things like that. Our husbands will want to join in.
it's a great idea. Why don't you do it?
No, they haven't got a clue.
Do you know, we started it just literally to talk to each other about life, really, about our attitudes to growing things. But we've genuinely had some really beautiful moments just together in the studio, which, we share with thousands of people. Mm-hmm. Now, I'm racking my brain, guys. I want to take you down the herb geek rabbit hole. So you just mentioned rosemary.
Yeah.
You do an edible wreath with some rosemary. Well, my day job is that when I run Urban Herbs, we stock literally, I think last year we stocked 130 different varieties of herb plant. And some of them are very, very similar to each other. So for example, we stocked, I think, 25 different varieties of lavender, for example. But let's just take rosemary. We definitely stock rosemary, but not as you know it, Jim. So you've got normal rosemary, which, by the way, I'm not knocking. It's absolutely delicious. It's a classic. We also stock barbecue rosemary. So that's common rosemary, but it's got a little bit of a smoky kick to it. It's absolutely delicious. You can put it with savory dishes. You can put it in a cocktail. And you know the sprig of the rosemary, it looks really good actually coming out of a cocktail glass. You've got trailing rosemary, which it's been bred to have a softer stem. So it's naturally going to spill and trail. And the chefs that we work with, they absolutely love trailing rosemary because they reckon that the stem is a bit softer and the flavour is more succulent. And then in 2023, for the very first time, we actually launched a new variety for us, which was ginger flavoured rosemary. Can you imagine how bizarre a flavour that is? Again, I've got to say, works really well in a cocktail. For those of you listening to this, the hosts of the podcast have got big smiles on their faces right now. But honestly, the ginger flavour comes across so strongly. You know, for some of the herbs that we grow, the flavour is just a hint. I'm going to say it really quietly, but for some of them, you have to use your imagination a little bit. Mm-hmm. With ginger rosemary, the ginger is so strong. It's so almost overpowering. And it makes me love what I do.
What puzzles me is, where do you find these? How do you come across these
Yeah, because it's not the thing that you would find in a supermarket or trotting down the street to the local farmer's market. You know, where?
Do you have to go out travelling across the world to find all these exotic kind of mixes, I suppose?
I guess part of my job is that I am a collector. So when we set up Urban Herbs, we actually set it up to be an old-fashioned kind of plant collection. So a bit like Pokemon, you've got to catch them all, you know? You've got to get them all in our polytunnel, one example of each. To answer your question, you know, they are pre-existing varieties, but they are actually cross-bred or selectively bred to encourage certain characteristics. Let's take a random one. So chocolate mint.
Love it.
Chocolate mint. I mean, it was the original for me. You know, when I first started doing this job, I remember being on a farmer's market and somebody rubbed the leaf and I saw their face change in that instant. And to me, that's what I love about my job because I get to live vicariously through my customers again. But chocolate mint, how do you create it? Well, in effect, it's selectively bred to encourage certain characteristics. So chocolate mint is a member of the peppermint family, but it's been selectively bred to have a little bit of a sweeter flavour. And the combination of the sweetness and the peppermint flavour combined together to give you that flavour of, you know, like really pure sweet chocolate.
Yeah.
Now, people listening to this might be thinking, okay, it sounds funny, it sounds interesting, but what do you do with it?
Yeah.
My gran was completely right. It would ruin your mint sauce. But then with something like chocolate mint, what you're going to be using it for is you're going to be harnessing that sweet flavour. So straight away, it makes a great herbal tea. Imagine a sweet peppermint herbal tea. Amazing. You can put it on the top of ice cream as a topping. And some of our customers have even used it to bake. And one of the chefs that we actually work with, he has done dishes where he's actually combined it with red meat because it makes sense, you know, because on the continent, you know, you would have chocolate sauce quite commonly on a steak. And that illustration there about chocolate mint, it just shows how diverse and powerful these herb plants are because from that one variety, I've just given you a load of meal options. You know, you've got your herbal tea, you've got your meat, you've got your dessert, you've got baking. And I guess in a way, that's what these herb plants do. They inspire you. You know, they're not just plants that you plant there and that looks nice and, I'll have that again next year. Straight away, as soon as you encounter one of these unusual varieties of herb plant, your brain starts going and you start thinking, whoa, what can I do with that? In the case of ginger rosemary, I mean, I thought I was quite desensitized to all these wonderful varieties. I really, in all seriousness, I thought I was over it. You know, when you're working with these varieties all day long, you think you can't be amazed anymore. And then you meet a variety that looks like rosemary and it tastes of ginger. That's really special, isn't it?
It sounds fantastic. I mean, I think you are dead right in that as soon as you touch a plant that smells, I mean, chocolate cosmos, for instance, it makes you want to taste it. So I do get where you're coming from with all of that. It's, for me, up here, I think we grow so many basic herbs that we've never sort of adventured into the varieties that you do. And the other thing is, up here, what we do, Andy, is when people start to take an allotment, they immediately start talking about where the herb patch is going to be. And I usually grimace at that time. I'm too old for it all. And I say, take them home. Don't bring them up here, because by the time you've got them home, they'll be wilted. So for me, it's about growing them at home in a safe place, that then when you are cooking, you can just go and fetch your mint, for instance, on your new potatoes. What's the point of having them 3 miles away up the allotment? So, I mean, what would we do? Would we create a new herb bed? Do you keep all of your herbs separate? How do you go about changing and choosing? There's so many varieties to put them all together so that you get the most out of them.
I think that's really interesting what you've just said, because we grow and stock so many different varieties of herb plants. And one of the really, really sort of fundamental starting points about, for me, growing herbs is that, you know, when people talk about giving advice about herb growing, and so often people will say, well, how do you grow herbs? Or how do you grow mixed herbs? And for me, I think you've got to be quite specific, and you've got to start almost dividing the herbs into categories. Divide the herbs into 2 categories initially. Herbs that want free draining conditions and herbs that want more moist conditions. There's more herbs that are in the first category than the second. So varieties like rosemary, thyme, sage, oregano, they want to be free draining. If your ground is not particularly free draining, I'd put them in a pot. The other category, those that want to be a bit more moist, you've got some options. If you are planting in the ground and it's quite rich, happy days. If it's not, you can work a bit of organic material into the ground just to hold the moisture in a little bit more. If you put them in a container, the herbs that want to be free draining, work some grit into the potting mix just to help them soak away. For those that want to be a bit more moist, again, you can just work that organic material into the potting mix. Varieties like mint, or there's a new variety that I absolutely love called Japanese parsley, big leaf, salad leaf, wild rocket, Burnett salad, celery leaf, varieties like that will want to be a bit more moist. So straight away, we've just divided the herbs into 2 categories, those that want to be free draining and those that want to be a bit more moist. Let's go a bit further. Let's divide the herbs into some more categories. So you've got your annual herbs. And this is what most people, I find, base their overall herb care around. So you've got your annuals such as basil, coriander, dill. And these are like fireworks. You plant them, you enjoy them, and that's it. You've got your perennials. You've got things like mint, parsley. They're going to grow for the season. They're going to lose their foliage. You've got your perennial evergreen herbs. And they're like your skyscrapers, your structural herbs. They're going to be there 12 months of the year, rain or shine. They're going to be there. And then where my job gets quite interesting is there's a few that are in between, varieties like pineapple sage, which not very hardy. It's got the best label in the world. If you look at any plant label, it will say half hardy. It really annoys me because it is or it isn't, right? In the case of pineapple sage, it really isn't. But its cousin, blackcurrant sage, is much more hardy. We're in a tropical climate compared to yourselves, just down the road in Birmingham. But we leave blackcurrant sage outside and it will survive most winter conditions. What I would say is that there are some varieties that I wouldn't perhaps plant at the allotment, varieties that you're going to use a lot and you're going to use on a nightly basis. So things like sort of rosemary, oregano. For me, there's a variety called hot and spicy oregano that I just can't live without. But then there's other herbs that are just so prolific, so low maintenance, so productive that actually I always describe them as the perfect kind of like plant them and forget about them herbs, that if you've got a little area at the allotment that you want to fill. So varieties like Burnett salad, that is absolutely prolific and not in an invasive way, but it keeps on going. Wild rocket, celery leaf, for me, they are the ultimate kind of allotment, cut and come again sources of salad because they're so low maintenance. Based on when this podcast is going to be released, I might not have released this on social media myself yet, but this year, those people that actually follow my personal account, Andy Grows Herbs on Instagram, you'll see that I've been doing a little bit of a project in my front garden. Back in February, I'm sure you will both remember that in the UK, there was actually a shortage of fresh fruit and veg.
Yeah.
And in our local well-known budget supermarket, there was actually labels put onto all the boxes of veg saying, only one courgette per customer, only one bag of salad per customer. But around that time, my wife, she'd actually fallen down the stairs and she'd broken her leg. So I was doing all the shopping for the first time in about 10 years. And I was walking around the supermarket, like a time traveller.
Yeah.
Because I was walking around the supermarket and I couldn't believe the cost of the food.
Yeah.
Myself and Kate, we live in a very down-to-earth area. There's a lot of people who live around us, who aren't on very high incomes. It really hit me when I was in the supermarket that there must be a lot of people who are having to make really tough decisions, not like dramatic, but when you get to the checkout, you have to add up your money and you think, oh, hang on a minute, I've got to take something out of my basket.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you something, I can tell you, I bet it's the fresh salad.
Yeah.
That's the first thing that comes out of the basket.
Definitely.
So anyway, I got home. I went onto Instagram and I broke one of the cardinal rules of social media. I posted while I was upset and I was angry.
Oh.
And I looked into the camera and I said, this isn't right. That people from, areas like the one that I live in, there's almost like a perception that growing things is a rich kid's game. And it really isn't. People in areas like mine should be growing food because actually, if you grow, and this is the key, expensive ingredients in small quantities, you can save yourself money.
Yeah.
Which is what we try.
Yeah,
to say to
that's
people,
what we always
on the
advise.
allotment.
Yeah, we always advise people either grow something that you really, really love or something that's expensive to purchase in the shops. And
and it works.
Yes,
doesn't it?
yeah. But I mean, when Elaine is Minister for Allotments,
Yes.
everybody will have an allotment,
Whether you like it or not.
and they will have a greenhouse as
They
well.
definitely
Yeah.
will.
Well, it's interesting because when I started talking about this, I thought the reaction was really, really interesting. Because don't get me wrong, there was a lot of positive reaction, but there was also a bit of a backlash. Because a lot of people reached out to me and said, don't get me wrong, like what you're doing and all this, but you can't save money by growing your own. Okay. Whenever somebody tells me that I can't do something, it's a bit like a red rag to a bull. So what I actually did was I dug up my front garden. We live in a formal council house and we've got a tiny front garden. It's about 3 meters by 3 meters. So I dug it up and I turned it into a food growing space. And I'm a bit OCD. So what I did was I set up a spreadsheet and every single time I harvested something from the front garden, I made a note of it and I rounded it down and I sort of worked out what that would have cost from the local supermarket. And I've kept a score all the way through the year. I kept all the receipts. I worked out how much it cost me to do the front garden. And the results are absolutely fascinating. Probably since around mid-March, we haven't had to buy any salad from the supermarkets. I find that this project of mine, because it's been so almost done to prove a point, it's actually taught me a lot.
Yeah.
Because the reaction of people I found so interesting. We recently recorded a couple of podcasts with James Wong, and it sounds a bit bizarre really, but he had quite a strong effect on my sort of professional life because back in 2013, we were doing a show down in London where I heard him speak. And he came out with this line again and again and again, that it's not about being self-sufficient. People try and sell you this dream that, you're going to be self-sufficient, you're going to live off grid. And it was interesting because a lot of the negative reaction that I got was from that perspective. Yeah. It was this idea that, you're not going to be able to be self-sufficient growing in your front garden. Well, that's not really the objective. The objective, to be brutally honest, is to save, first of all, save £100 a month and then save £150 a month and then go from there. The project has also had some other very interesting side effects, such as, we've actually got to know the people in our local area much better. But I can tell you something, where we live, the reaction of people has been astonishing. None of the negative reaction has come from people locally. Every single person that I've spoke to gets it.
Andy, has it set a trend? Have the neighbours started to do it? Is anyone following what you're doing in that neighbourhood?
The answer is no. And again, I shared this message that, doing this, I think is quite revolutionary.
Yeah.
That caused a little bit of a debate about the semantics of whether or not it's revolutionary growing your own. But I would argue that it is in our area. It's definitely not the norm. Off the back of this front garden growing project, me and my wife we had a little bit of a chat. We had a bit of a, do you guys remember, the sitcom, The Good Life?
Ooh,
do we?
Yeah.
Yeah.
We grew up with it.
I'll tell you something, right? And this is absolutely terrible, but my first crush was Margot Ledbetter.
No.
Well, people associate me with her.
You can associate me with that film.
And do you remember there's a moment where Tom and Barbara decide that they're going to make a big life change? We had that moment ourselves off the back of this project because we got a bit fired up about a lot of the things that are currently going on in the world and in our country. And we decided to do something about it. It's always a bit dangerous when you get in those moods, isn't it?
Yeah.
So me and Kate actually set up a community interest company, a non-profit, to go into primary schools in inner city Birmingham and teach food growing. We've applied the same principles that I've applied in that front garden growing project to a school in proper inner city Birmingham. The reaction of those kids made it worthwhile.
And there'll be more from Andy later on in this episode. If you want to catch up with more of Andy, don't forget he's also got a podcast with his lovely wife, Kate, called The Growing Up Podcast. We're never going to grow up, are we, Elaine?
No, we couldn't have called ours that.
No.
We don't grow up.
Contact the Potty Plotters anytime on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram at Potty Plotters or email naughtycorner@pottyplotters.uk.
Well, we asked you to get in contact with us, and you have. You've been getting in contact with us in your droves. What does that mean, Elaine?
I don't know really, but loads of people have. And let's have a chat. No, we're not going to have a chat because she actually wrote in, didn't she?
Yeah.
So it's Sue from Manchester Way. And she sent a lovely couple of photographs, didn't she, about her... Well, it's her middle grandson who's been making bug hotels like we did.
Aww.
Isn't that lovely?
Aww.
And what's really nice is that they're really getting into it in a big way. And that's important because he's only a little person. You can relate to that, can't you?
Yes, I can, thank you. And I'll tell you who else has been in contact, or rather, we didn't contact him. We bumped into him, didn't we, at one of our talks recently? And we just want to give a quick shout out to Keith Fern, who we talked to in episode 13. And Keith is a brilliant gardener, but he's also blind. So that was a really interesting chat we had. But we just want to give a shout out to Keith and his lovely wife, who have been celebrating their 60th wedding anniversary. Do you think you'll ever get to that, Elaine?
If I do, he might not. Actually, we've also had a lady by the name of Jean Harrison contact us on our Instagram, and she says, "Hello, girls."
Well, like that.
I know.
Long way off girls, yeah.
Any idea on what to put on slippery slabs? That's easy for me to say, as I live on my own, and the constant wet weather has made them go green in places and very slippery. And it doesn't get much winter sun, thanks. Now then, what I'm going to tell you is, Jean, make friends with somebody who's got a...
Costco card. No. Wasn't that where you got it from? I thought you were going to recommend that wet and forget that you're always talking about.
I was going to say, make a friend with somebody who's got a pressure washer, not a Costco card, although I'm sure that you can buy them from Costco, Julia. No, just a pressure washer, because they're quite tricky to handle and they can make it even slippier, but once it gets all that green off, it will make it much safer for you. But yes, if you have got a Costco card, please get it from there if necessary. And what I'm going to recommend is Wet and Forget. If you've never heard of it, I can tell you it's absolutely brilliant. You dilute it and you spray it and water it onto not only the slabs, but you can do it on your driveways. It gets rid of all the moss. It stops it growing, actually, and it doesn't harm any of your plants. You can use it up walls as well. I'm looking at producer Gareth just in case he ever needs any. Wet and Forget. Have you got a Costco card? Oh, no. Well, have you?
Yes.
Okay, Julia has, so make friends with her and she'll help you. Oh, I tell you what, this was going to be such an easy podcast. It's turned into a bit of a difficulty.
The Plotcast Podcast with the Potty Plotters.
Right, let's get back to our interview then with Andy from Urban Herbs. So we've covered about his favourite herbs and about him digging up his front garden. I love that.
Yeah.
And growing salad. But how did he get into growing in the first place?
Like a lot of people, I think growing things really skipped my parents' generation.
Yeah.
But my gran most definitely knew the value of growing things because she grew up on a farm during World War II. In general, there are not that many younger people coming into horticulture, but particularly into production horticulture. And this is something I'm really passionate about because the opportunities are there. It's now harder to bring plant material into the UK. And that naturally, through supply and demand, does create gaps in the market. I'm actually trying to work with a few people. I always phrase it as, they're young people of all ages who are either career changers or they are looking to go into horticulture as a career, particularly production horticulture. Because, I'm 36. The next youngest grower that I know is in the late 40s. The next youngest above him is in his late 50s. And if you go around the big flower shows, walk around the floral marquees and have a look at the ages of the people running the businesses. We are heading for a shortage of people working in these industries. And I think that would be a terrific shame in 10 years' time if you can't get all those weird and wonderful varieties of Dahlia or Heuchera. So we're trying to work to almost build a ladder that will allow more people to come into this industry.
How do we get people to realise that there are careers in horticulture that don't require going through universities? Because I would imagine setting yourself up and becoming a grower is quite a gamble unless you've got some money behind you. How do we encourage people
to have some knowledge as well, wouldn't you?
So
what would you say to people, Andy?
I think that knowledge is the key, but not necessarily knowledge about growing things. It's really, really important to say that you're absolutely right that, further education, there is other options. But, and this is a big but, I came into this off the back of doing an undergraduate degree in history and politics and then a master's in the history of religion. Now, all of the skills that I learned doing those degrees, I feel has almost equipped me to be a kind of a better communicator, but also in terms of business strategy.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm going to be really honest with you. I had that background. It basically took me a decade to get from beginning, paying my tuition fees, to where I am now. And where I am now is running Urban Herbs. Yeah. It's being able to employ several people, including my wife, including my mom, to the point where I'm actually confident enough, in myself to, I've got a book out currently, and to be able to almost spend whatever little bit of free time I have putting the information out on social media and trying to get more people into this.
Yeah. With all things horticultural, we say patience is probably the most important thing that you need.
But a lot of people listening to this, I think, are going to be thinking, with patience, the mortgage company isn't going to be that patient.
Yeah.
So what we need to do, in my opinion, is we need to set up that support network that are going to cut out a few kinks.
Yeah.
A couple of kinks in the journey. That's what I think we need to do. In the last 7 days, I've had to become an expert on website DNS settings. You have to be an expert on marketing, setting up the spring marketing campaign. You have to be an expert on Facebook paid advertising. You have to learn about video editing, podcast editing, photography, videography. I've had to learn some DIY because foxes have ripped open the side of our polytunnel. So there's so many different skills. Yeah. The other thing I just want to say, because I just want to revisit the question you originally asked me about 3 hours ago, and when I started this answer. If I was talking to somebody who was thinking about going into horticulture, I would tell them the story of me and my wife. I would explain to them that we live in an era where if you go on social media, there's so much being bombarded at you. It's, you've got to have side hustles. You've got to push. You've got to work harder. You've got to get this. Why? Because you've got to afford that Caribbean holiday every year. Okay, so let me get this straight. The system that we've got is that you've got to basically stress yourself out, exhaust yourself, doing something you don't want to do for 48 weeks out of the year, so you can have 2 weeks of bliss. That doesn't sound right to me.
No.
Those of you who have listened to our podcast will know that Kate recorded an episode. It was the second episode where she opened up about the chronic health condition that she's had over the last 12 months. And 18 months now. And it was one of the most brave things I've ever listened to, by the way, because she really put herself out there. And she explained how actually working, giving up her quite stressful job And working with Urban Herbs, don't get me wrong, it is stressful here at times, but when you've spent a stressful day in the office, you get to go outside. In fact, you have to go outside and water the herbs. You have to do some potting. And it's about embracing, in my opinion, a slower way of life. When you start to embrace that slower way of life, the results can be very, very unexpected. And you just might not be as financially worse off as you think you will be. You know, Kate always says that before she worked with Urban Herbs, the seasons, they were just something that she used to experience when she walked from the car to the front door.
Yeah.
Now you live it.
Yeah.
And the weather forecast is so important, isn't it? We listen to it every day. And then everybody starts to compare what they heard when they get up here as to how much time we've actually got to dig or to do and to spend outside.
Yeah.
And it's very powerful, actually. Anybody that's got an allotment will know this, that when you get soaked, when you're freezing cold, we all complain about it, but secretly it makes you feel alive, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Although sometimes I think when you're getting older and you're doing projects in the winter, you think, oh, why have we done this? But it does make you feel alive. It's better than being stuck inside, I think.
And that's brought us straight back to the beginning of our discussion, because I think that engaging the senses, that's why the herbs matter. Because one of my customers, actually, he works in psychology, and he explained this to me beautifully. You know, he said that most of us spend most of our time living in, I think they call it the front cortex of your brain, you know, the part of your brain that deals with logic and reason. It's the part of my brain that was calculating what time I need to be ready with my microphone and looking sexy to record this podcast. Right? But if you can get out of the front cortex of your brain into the rear cortex, and that's the part of your brain that deals with nostalgia, with memory, with emotion. When you rub a herb like chocolate mint, you're directly accessing the rear cortex of your brain. And that has a very, very powerful effect on you in terms of taking you out of whatever stressful thing is happening in your day. And once you discover that, it's so powerful and therapeutic. Because, you know, again, we all live in increasingly well-insulated homes. We all live lives that are quite insulated from the changing seasons around us. And just as it's very, very therapeutic, if challenging, sometimes being cold, being wet, getting soaked, it's the same when you interact with these herb plants. It's the same when you encounter ginger rosemary for the first time. It's the same when you finally, you know, you get a variety called lime mint. And lime mint, to me, is the single strongest variety that we grow. The smell of lime mint, I rub the leaf, it takes me straight to the part of my brain that deals with aroma, with scent. And it takes me away from whatever is going on in my day. And I'm so grateful to those herb plants for that.
I think that everybody needs a little herb bed. And when I am Minister for Allotments, Julia, I think that is going to be on the list as well.
Right, okay.
And we're going to test some of your herbs and let's see what we can conjure up using them.
Yeah.
Hope everybody else does as well.
Thanks so much, guys. See you later.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
So if you want to know more about herbs and growing, then you can follow the podcast that he and Kate have done, which is called Growing Up. That we will never do, Julia. And also you can follow him on Instagram at Urban Herbs UK. Go and have a look what he's been doing. So what have you been doing this week then, Julia?
Well, we've been out and about again, haven't we? Talking to people in groups and causing the usual mayhem. In fact, now we're moving to Christmas, the gin has come out when we go to visit the groups. So that livens things up, doesn't it, Elaine? And we're back on local regional radio. Local regional? Is that
that's
a thing?
right.
Yeah,
it is a thing.
Yeah, okay. And we're still working on that community project. So we've now got a planting plan for them and we're planning a teaching plan for them, aren't we?
Yeah, and I think it goes back to everything that we say. If you don't know what you're doing, research it or find somebody who does know what they're doing. Don't be in a rush to get planting. Sort your plan out first.
If you'd like Elaine and Julia to come to a talk for your group, get in touch. naughtycorner@pottyplotters.uk.
Well, thanks everybody for listening. And as I've said to Andy and Kate, although we didn't talk to her, I feel like we know her now, from Urban Herbs. Well, what we're going to be doing next time then, Julia?
Well,
What are we going to be doing next time? There's loads to talk
you've been
about.
buying amaryllis, haven't you? Why have you been doing
It's
that?
not a drug. It's not anything that should be banned.
Well, we'll just tell the listeners to listen in to this one because it's going to be quite interesting, and collect any candles that you've got spare knocking around.
Yeah, because what we're going to be doing?
You're waxing your amaryllis again, aren't you? You can't help yourself, can you?
No, but I tell you what, it's mesmerising. I bet you've never had yours waxed, have you?
The Plotcast Podcast with the Potty Plotters is an Amberland Media production.